Just a couple of things before I get started. When I published this book, Crossway said, we are going to call it How to Read and Understand the Old Testament Prophets. And I said, no, we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets, because there's no difference between John in the book of Revelation and Daniel, Zechariah, Ezekiel, and all the other prophets. He's communicating in exactly the same way. And in the back of this book, there is a little diagram of the book of Revelation. That's one thing. And secondly, I just published an article on the literary structure of Revelation, and I will be talking about that in this talk. A lot of good work has been done on the book of Revelation in the last 30 years in particular. But there is more good work that has to be done. There is a Christian scholar by the name of Stephen Schooling, and he did a PhD in Bristol, England, and his dissertation was a discourse grammar analysis of the literary structure of Revelation. So I don't know if you know what in Europe they call it text linguistics. And in North America, they call it discourse grammar. This is a form of linguistic analysis that looks at the language above and beyond the boundary of the clause. So there are features of the language that operate only at the level of the text. They operate beyond the level of just one sentence. And so he is one of the first scholars to use this newer method of linguistic study to analyze the literary structure of the book of Revelation. So even though we have some good commentaries on the book of Revelation, for example, by Greg Beale, who was here last year, and I would like to the one by Craig Kester in the Anchor Bible is a very good commentary. He's a Lutheran scholar, but Greg Beale is probably one of the best on the allusions to the Old Testament. But Craig Kester is one of the best on the Greco-Roman cultural setting, and I will show that to you. And Tom Schreiner has just published a second commentary. There's one in the Expositor commentary, and there's a new one in the Baker Exegetical Commentary on the Old Testament. Tom, as you know, is my colleague at Southern Seminary, and we're the only two people that swim every day. So for the last 8 years, I was talking with him about the book of Revelation every day as we swam. But I don't agree with him on everything, and so naturally, I'm probably the one that's wrong, because he's the greater scholar. So let's see. So I published this article, but what I wanted to say is, even though we have these good commentaries, none of these scholars has used the work by Stephen Schooling. So these commentaries can be improved by better knowledge of the literary structure. If you are one of my students, you know that I always start with the literary structure. Now, I want to show you something so that you know how to find my article. So what you do, we're doing this live. There you do Gospel Witness, Toronto Baptist Seminary online, right? This is just a popular journal from the Toronto Baptist Seminary, the Gospel Witness. There you go to the Gospel Witness. Click on Archives. And It starts in 1922. So you go up here to, if you click on 2026, click on 2026 and download, you'll get my article, okay? All right, let's see if we can do something here. Slideshow. Somebody said this looks like, I forget, I was talking to somebody, looks like the Philippines, I don't know. Maybe that's my idea of the new creation, but anyway. So, I don't claim to have everything solved in the book of Revelation, but I think I can give you some help on how to read this text properly. And I think there are 4 things that are important. I believe in what I'm going to call a literary approach to the text, and you will see that unfold. Secondly, as you can imagine, we have to ask ourselves, what is the genre? What kind of literature are we reading? And for sure, he calls it a prophecy, as I'm going to show you. And it's also apocalyptic. Thirdly, the allusions to the Old Testament. So I don't know what Dr. Beale said, but I'm sure he would tell you that this is the book that has fewer direct quotations but more allusions to the Old Testament than any other book in the New Testament. And all Christians want to understand the book of Revelation, but they don't. You have to know Daniel, Zechariah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the prophets. If you don't know the Old Testament, you're not going to understand what he's saying. And I will show that. So I had read the book in Greek, of course, a number of times. I didn't start to study the book of Revelation until 10 years ago. But I'm in a good position because by that time, I knew Daniel, Zechariah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah. And so I had the rest of the Bible put together. There's a reason why it comes at the end of the Bible. And fourthly, the context of the Greco-Roman culture. So John was writing to people in the first century. If you're some people have an interpretation of the book of Revelation that is so futuristic that it would never have had anything relevant to say to people in the first century. We have to understand how this book impacted the people in the first century and subsequent generations of Christians. A literary approach not only pays attention to the characteristics of the genre, but also the artistry and rhetorical techniques used by the author as part of the communicative keys leading to correct interpretation. And some of this artistry will be demonstrated momentarily. So you will be very surprised. Every word in this book is calculated and counted. It is commonly recognized now that the book of Revelation combines 2 different literary genres and structures with immaculate skill. First, the book comprises a circular letter addressed to 7 specific churches with a normal opening greeting and closing benediction that is used in the other letters in the New Testament. It addresses concerns of real churches in the first century as opposed to being a message only understood by future generations. Therefore, parts are specific to each church and parts are intended for all the churches. No doubt John could have addressed fewer or more churches in Asia Minor. He could have written to 1 or 2 churches. I'm sure there were more than 7 churches in Asia Minor, in Turkey. But the definitiveness with which he seems to envisage his prophecy as the final culmination of the whole biblical prophetic tradition suggests a relevance for all Christian churches. So I suggest that the 7 symbolizes that his message is addressed to specific churches as representative of all churches. And he basically is addressing 3 things. He's talking about Christians who are complacent. He's talking about Christians who are being attracted too strongly to the current anti-Christian culture. And he's talking about Christians who are being persecuted to the point of death for their faith. And so these are the things that we are facing here in Europe and in North America. Second, I'm not very good with my slides here, so we've already done this. Second, John describes his work as a prophecy. And I'll just make some comments here. Revelation as Christian prophecy. Normally in the New Testament, Christian prophecy can contain oracles, such as we see in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 30. It can also contain vision reports. And Revelation contains both oracles and vision reports. There's a strong connection to Hebrew prophecy. And so this is a repetition of what I was saying last time. Hebrew prophets were not primarily predictors of the future. They were speaking about the future to disclose what is at stake in the present. They give warnings and exhortations to startle people to seeing things differently, to live differently, and to commit to a different future. We talked in the last hour how the Hebrew prophets confront evil and offer hope. We talked about how they address concentric circles, Israel, the nations, the entire cosmos. And we see that in the book of Revelation because he starts with the church and then deals with the nations, and then he talks about a cosmic battle. So we see how strongly connected he is to the tradition of Hebrew prophecy. The word apocalyptic comes from the first word in the book, the apocalypsis, which means the uncovering, the revelation of Jesus Christ. These are examples of Jewish apocalypses written between 250 BC and 250 AD. One of the things that we see here is what we call pseudepigrapha. Pseudo means false, and epigrapha means to write upon. So you put a false name upon. So for example, the book of Enoch was not written by Enoch in the Bible. It was written by someone. In fact, there is no book of Enoch. There are fragments. I've published an article on this. I analyzed all the fragments. So I went to the basement on that one, okay? Because there are people who say, well, Jude quotes from Enoch, and therefore it must be part of the canon, and I show that this is false. But Enoch, the people who were writing these books knew that inspiration had ceased. So they used names from the period where inspiration was active to try and put authority on their books. And this is recognized not only by evangelicals, but by liberal scholars. So I have one of my professors, one of my godless professors at the University of Toronto, actually said this. He said they were fooled in the case of the book of Daniel, but but he recognized that they needed authority for their work, so they were using names from the time when the Spirit of God was active. Similarities with Jewish apocalypse. We'll look at similarities and differences. Similarities with Jewish apocalypses. He addresses a concrete historical situation and brings God's perspective. He takes his readers outside this world to heaven to give the perspective of heaven on their situation. That's why after the churches, after the letter, the circular letter to the churches, you start with the scene in heaven. This is the Lord roaring from Zion, and the grass of Carmel withers. You're getting the divine perspective on your culture. Another question that it shares with Jewish apocalypses is, who is Lord over the earth? Who is Lord of the world? There are differences. There are differences. I'm going to go back and forth from these slides to what I've written. One of the differences is the sheer prolific extent of visual imagery. So apocalypses contain brief and self-contained visions. Revelation is a single vision. So after the prologue, all the way to the epilogue, it's a single vision. So there are no Jewish apocalypses like this that have such incredible symbolic imagery. Interpretations by accompanying angel are rare in Revelation. Visual symbols in Revelation contain their own meaning. We'll talk about that. Differences. John is not pseudepigrapha. He writes in his own name and does not seal up the vision like the book of Daniel. He doesn't have to situate himself in the distant past, and he can address their actual situation. The visual imagery and symbolism in Revelation. So here we see the revelation from Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known. And I talked about that earlier. I want to talk about it again. So this is the verb seimino in Greek, by sending his angel to his servant. And this is a direct allusion. So Greg Beale already noticed this back in his commentary in 1993. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has made known to the king what will be in the latter days. He who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. That's verses 28 and 29. And the same thing in verse 45. The great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. And what I want to show you now, we're going to go a little scholarly here, is the Septuagint translates this by the verb seimino. So the verb that John uses in Revelation 1:1 is the verb that the Septuagint is using to translate this. So there's the Septuagint, es seimana, and there's John, es seimanon. All right? He signified it. So do you know what John is telling you? This is symbolic literature. You're supposed to read it just like Daniel 2. That's what he's telling you in the very first verse. He's showing you how to read his text. So the question is, why do we have so much, why this proliferation of visual imagery and symbolism? It's like the Star Wars movies, okay? First of all, John wants to engage the emotions as well as the intellect. So what I want to tell you is the book of Revelation is the best book in the Bible on how God is going to deal with evil. But it's not an abstract treatise. It's not a dry book of systematic theology. There's a new book out called What About Evil? Dr. Stephen Wellham told me it's a great book, but it's not going to grab the attention of very many people. John will grab your attention. And that's why Star Wars, that's why so many people, I don't know what happens over here, but so many people in the USA are into the Star Wars movies. My grandchildren love the Star Wars movies, because they're dealing with evil in a way that talks to their emotions as well as their mind. And secondly, to counteract the media barrage of the empire. So I'm going to show you in a moment or two what was being tweeted by the Emperor of Rome. Never mind Trump and these other people, all right? I don't know where that, I'll come into that in a moment. So, they were surrounded by a barrage of media, just like young people are today. And John wanted to fill their minds with something else, a different vision. And that's why he's communicating in this way. How do we explain the visual imagery and the symbolism? Well, we have to do two things. We get guidance from the author. So, for example, the first thing that happens is he has a vision of the ascended, exalted, risen Christ. And he sees this candlestick. I saw 7 golden lampstands. By the way, that's right out of Zechariah chapter 4. So he sees these golden lampstands. And then, what does he tell you? Verse 20, as for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So in case you want to know, he's telling you, I'm telling you right now, this is what it means. I'm giving you my own commentary. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to listen to John as he explains the symbolism of his message. And the second thing that we have to do is be consistent. So for example, chapter 13, verse 16, you have the mark of the beast. It causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or on the forehead. Now, there are Christians who believe that this is literal. But this is totally false because, look, in chapter 14, verse 1, I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144 who had his name and the Father's name written on their foreheads. Those same people do not take this literally. So you have to be consistent. All commentators say that the sign on the forehead of the believer is symbolic. So it's going to be symbolic in the case of the mark of the beast as well. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, I decide to do this one literally and I decide to do this one symbolically. It's all symbolic. There are allusions to the Old Testament, and when you understand these, they will lift you right off your chair. And I'm going to, if you haven't seen this one, it will lift you right off your chair, okay? Among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of the rushing waters. So you read this, and you see the Son of Man, right? And so what do you think of? Daniel chapter 7, okay? Now listen, in Daniel chapter 7, who has the white hair? Wow, did you see that? It's the Ancient of Days that has the white hair. It's not the Son of Man. So John thinks that the Son of Man and the Ancient of Days are the same. Do you see that? That's how he wants you to read this text. If you don't know your Old Testament, that just goes right over your head. Here's the government media barrage. We get enough of this in North America. I don't know what's happening here, but the message coming down from the Roman Empire is threefold. Number one, the Roman Empire is the ruler of the kings of the earth. Number 2, the Roman Empire is favored by the gods. And number 3, the Roman Empire is the bearer of pax. So we bring you peace. All right? So you notice that in Revelation chapter 1, verse 5, Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. So he has a counter-imperial message. Did you get that? John's against the media barrage coming down from the government. And I'm going to show you. So this is a relief on a temple in Asia Minor in the 1st century, okay? And the guy on the left is Augustus Caesar, okay? And in the middle, he's holding up his military armor, his military equipment. And on the right-hand side is Nike. Nike is the goddess of victory. So you know Nike. They call their running shoes Nike because Nike means victory in Greek. If you wear our running shoes, you're going to be a winner. That's their message. Now, what do you notice about Augustus? Come on, be honest. He's nude, okay? Now, do you know what that means? In the in the 1st century, only gods are depicted nude. So he's saying, I'm a god. And you see his military equipment. Underneath his feet, he's stepping on a woman from Britain. So what he's telling you, you know that if you went to school, Weni Witty Wiki, I came, I saw, I conquered. You see? The peace that I'm bringing you is based on violence. It's conquering other nations. And this is the Twitter, this is the Facebook, this is the Meta, this is the X of the ancient world. If you're living in one of those places like Ephesus, every time there's a parade, every time there's a banquet, every time there's a festival, every time you walk around, these things are on the coins. Every time you spend a piece of money, this is the message coming to you from the government. So now, John wants to fill your mind with a different imagery. And how do we interpret that? So we start, for example, let me just read this quote. Let me just read this quote from Richard Bauckham before I get further in this. Consistency is also a principle in correct interpretation. We cannot interpret the mark of the beast on the hand or forehead literally, but construe the name written on the foreheads of the saints as symbolic. To be consistent, the mark of the beast must also be symbolic. Bauckham says, Revelation has suffered from interpretation which takes its images too literally. Even the most sophisticated interpreters all too easily slip into treating the images as codes, which need only to be decoded to yield literal predictions. But this fails to take the images seriously as images. John depicts the future in images in order to be able to do both more and less than a literal prediction could. Less because Revelation does not offer a literal outline of the course of future events, as though prophecy were merely history written in advance. That's a false understanding of prophecy. But more because what it does provide is insight into the nature of God's purpose for the future, and does so in a way that shapes the reader's attitudes to the future and invites their active participation in the divine purpose. So it's like our cartoons. It's like our cartoons, editorial cartoons. So if you have a newspaper in the United States, you'll see an elephant and a donkey, right? And if you don't have a background in the United States, these beasts represent the government. So the elephant represents the Republicans and the donkey represents the Democrats. But it's actually exactly the same in the first century. So I can give you quotes from Tacitus where he calls the government a beast. So the fact that the government is portrayed as a beast is not new, but it's the way the cartoon portrays those beasts that shapes your attitudes to the current events. That's what's happening in Revelation 13. These are like editorial cartoons. So we're dealing with Revelation 4 and 5, and we see what we see is a set of concentric circles. So in the center we have the throne of God, and later on we also learn the Lamb, the throne of God and the Lamb. We have the 4 living creatures, and then we have the 24 elders, and then we have the angels in the heavenly court. So how do we interpret this? Well, if you know your Bible, it's right out of Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel 1 to 3. That's what you have, the same vision of God on the throne, and you have the 4 living creatures. The 4 living creatures represent creation. So there's a human being, there's a tame animal, there's a wild animal, and there's a bird. So it represents the creation. God, if you learn nothing from me today, it's the number one doctrine of Israel is there is only one creator God. God wants to be known as the creator. He wants to be known as the giver of life. And that's what we see here. The angels in the heavenly court, they're part of the scene in the Old Testament. But the 24 elders are not. They're not in Ezekiel 1 to 3. So where do they come from? Well, they come from the first century because elders were leaders in Jewish communities and Christian communities. And so this is where what John is doing. He's combining imagery from the Old Testament with things from the culture of his time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the literary structure. I mentioned Stephen Schooling, and he's done enormous work. It's a 700-page book on the literary structure of the book of Revelation, and a lot of good things in there that have been missed by the other researchers in the last 30 years. His work has not been utilized by magisterial commentaries published since that time, nor has analysis of the literary structure been a strength of these more recent works. So I would say the commentaries by Beale, by Craig Kester, by Tom Schreiner, they have great value, but the literary structure is not where they shine. Here we can briefly describe the results of Schooling's work and show implications of the literary structure. First of all, this is not the literary structure of Revelation, and you may have heard this before. What we see is a vision set in a narrative framework. So then the prologue, verses 1 to 11, the epilogue, verses 6 to 21, and then there's an interlude in chapter 10:1 to 11:2. So the interlude interrupts the vision. I'll tell you what John does. He takes the vision, the call of Ezekiel in Ezekiel 1 to 3. He takes the call of Ezekiel and he splits it into 2 parts. The first part is chapters 4 and 5, and chapter 10, where John eats the scroll. That's what Ezekiel does in chapter 3. So it's modeled after Ezekiel 1 to 3. So there's a narrative framework. Notice in the prologue, he's told to write. In the interlude, he's told, do not write. So he hears the 7 thunders, and he's about to write it down, and God says, do not write. And then in the epilogue, he's told to write. So we see that. There are also overlap links. So one of the things that's difficult about the book of Revelation is that there are overlap portions where one part is ending and another part is already beginning. John is ordered to stop the prophetic activity. Then John is ordered to eat the scroll, and then John is ordered to renew the prophetic activity. There are minor components that I might call narrative orienters. Phrases like, "and I saw." For example, in chapter 20, at the end of chapter 19 through chapter 20, you have the phrase, "and I saw," eight or nine times. These are not paragraph markers, but it's a way of keeping the listener in touch with the narrator. It provides cohesion to the literary whole. It's not necessarily a paragraph marker. There are what we call prosodic features. For example, the macarisms, the blessings. So this is an example of how carefully structured the book of Revelation is. So there are 7 blessings. Did you notice that? 7 blessings. Why is this thing is supposed to show me the notes here. None of the blessings is closely attached to their immediate context. All of them could be removed, and it would not change the information content of the book at all. They could be placed elsewhere in the text and still contribute almost as effectively as they do in their actual positions. To that extent, they stand aside from the hierarchical structure of units within units. So the word prosodic means to stands apart or outside the literary structure and functions at the level of the book as a whole. I want to talk about the narrative framework and chronology, and this will maybe be a challenge to your thinking because this is different. I want to say 3 things. There are 2 referential worlds. There's the visionary world and there's our world, our physical world. The chronology of the visionary world is not necessarily equivalent to the chronology of our physical world. So you cannot assume that chronology in John's vision matches chronology in our world. Number 2, the sequence in the narrative textual units is not necessarily equivalent to the sequence of the visionary content. So he doesn't always tell us things in the same order in which they appear. In fact, Hebrew literature is based on repetition, and John repeats himself many times. He goes around the same topic many times, and I'm going to try and point that out. I think in chapter 16, Armageddon, you see the final battle. I think you see the same final battle in chapter 19, and you see the same final battle in chapter 20, and I will give you proof of that in a moment. Even if the system of chronology is the same, a narrator is free to tell his story according to a chronology independent of the referential world. So I think one of the biggest problems in the last 2,000 years is that Christians have tried to connect parts of the vision with our space and time, and I don't think that's John's purpose. I want to show you how carefully structured the book is. So there are many things in the book that occur where they occur just 3 times or just 4 times. 3 is a sign of perfection, 4 is a sign of the creation, 7 is a sign of perfection, and 12 is a good number as well from the background of Israel. So many things occur in 3s, 4s, 7s, and 12s. And there may be some variation, but it's the same thing. So notice this. In chapter 4, we have flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. Then it gets more serious. Thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and earthquake. Then it gets more serious. Lightning, rumblings, thunders, earthquake, and hail. Then it gets even more serious. Lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, violent earthquake, and hail. So what's happening is, the first time it's the throne room in heaven. Chapter 8 is after the seals. Chapter 11 is after the trumpets. And chapter 16 is after the bowls. So you have the same thing after each one of those, only it's getting more serious. So you have to pay attention because John has measured every word that he wrote down. I would argue the literary structure of Revelation is 7 sections of 7 paragraphs each. It's very much like the Gospel of John. So if you know the Gospel of John, you have a prologue and an epilogue, and in between you have Jesus' ministry, the upper room discourse, and the passion narrative, right? You should be able to think your way through the Gospel of John like that. Now, in chapters 1 to 12, where you have the ministry of Jesus, I would call it the book of signs. It's divided into 7 signs, okay? And he tells you, he says, this is the first sign that Jesus did, and then he says, this is the second sign, and then he leaves it up to you to figure out what the other signs are, okay? And John does the same thing in the book of Revelation. So here we have, first of all, we have 7 messages to the churches. We have 7 seals. We have 7 trumpets. We have 7 bowls. So there are only 3 other sections where where he leaves it up to you. He doesn't actually leave it up to you, because I'm going to show you there are markers. There are markers which are dividing them into, which are telling you what to look for. There are 7 signs, 7 proclamations, and 7 new things. So here's the detail. Stephen Schooling divides it into 7 cycles, and each cycle has a setting, has an introduction, and then a main body. So cycle 1, setting and body. Cycle 2, setting and body. Cycle 3, setting and body. There are also interludes. You notice that there's an interlude after the 7 seals. There's an interlude after the 7 trumpets. There's an interlude after the 7 signs. There's an interlude after the 7 proclamations. But there is no interlude after the 7 bowls. The interludes actually provide hope. They're sections providing hope. Remember how Hebrew prophets work. He condemns evil in the society, and then he has a message of hope. And so you go through the 7 seals and you think, boy, can anything get worse? And then he provides a message of hope. Then you have 7 trumpets, and you think, well, that's the end of the world. No, there's an opportunity of evangelism and salvation for the nations. But after the 7 bowls, that's it. That's the final word of judgment. I'm going to show you a little more about the literary structure. From Revelation 20 to 17:1 to 22:9, there are 2 distinct sections. This literary unit consists of 2 sections which begin and end in the same way with the words. When did we start? Well, I'm trying to figure out where I am with time. 1:30? Okay, I got to see how I can get here. Note, they begin and end with the same words. So look at 17:1. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute. He carried me away into the spirit in the desert." You have the same thing in 21:9 and 10. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. He carried me away into the spirit unto a mountain great and high." The language comes out of Ezekiel, but you see those 2 repetitions. Then they also end with the same thing. So 19 ends with, "Then he said to me, these are the true words of God. I fell at his feet to worship him. He said, don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God." This 22 ends with the same way. He said, "These words are trustworthy and true. I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel." He said, "Don't do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and your brothers who keep the testimony. Worship God." So they begin and end with the same words. Do you see that? So he's showing you these are 2 sections. And the one section is on the Babylon whore, and the other one is on the Jerusalem bride. So what he wants you to do is he wants you to compare and contrast the Babylon whore with the Jerusalem bride, just like you compare Daniel 2 and 7. The portrayal in Revelation 21 is symbolic, just as in 17:1. He's telling you the 7 heads are 7 hills, also 7 kings. The 10 horns are 10 kings. The waters you saw are peoples, multitude, language, and nations. That phrase also occurs only a set number of times in the book. The woman you saw is the great city. He's explaining the symbolism for you. And 21 and 22 is full of symbolism too. We talked about this on Thursday. Chapter 7 gives you a pair of cameos. They're 2 vignettes of the same scene, the same group of people. So in chapter 4 and 5, he hears about a lion and he sees a lamb. In chapter 7, there are 2 paragraphs, 1 to 8 and 9 to 17. In 1 to 8, he sees 144,000. Sorry, he hears about 144,000, and when he looks, he sees a multitude dressed in white from the Great Tribulation. So these are, just as the lion and the lamb are 2 pictures of the same person, so here we have 2 pictures of the same group of people. On the one hand, it's the restored Israel in perfection, and on the other hand, they're people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. And they've come through the Great Tribulation, which means the whole period between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ is the Great Tribulation. It's not some period at the end. We're in the Great Tribulation now. Open your eyes and you'll experience it. He goes around the topic. There's repetition in Hebrew literature. He goes around the topic. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So in Ezekiel 39, in chapter 19, you have the rider on the white horse, you have a battle, and the birds and the wild animals are invited to feast on the dead. This comes from Ezekiel 38 and 39. And then in Revelation 20, when the devil is released from the abyss, he goes out and gets Gog and Magog and gathers the nations against God's people. And this is also from Ezekiel 38 and 39. So I suggest it's the same battle. Here's we can go through this quickly. There's the Ezekiel 39. The birds are invited to drink. There's Revelation 19. The birds are invited. There's Ezekiel 38, Gog and Magog gathered against the people of God. There's Satan going out to deceive the nations, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. If you want to study this to the basement, the best book is by Edvard Lipinski, Toponyme et Gentilesse biblique face à l'histoire. Okay? And this is the most authoritative book. And he identifies all of these people that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. What Ezekiel is doing is he's trying to name the nations who are on the edge of his map. That's as far as you go in grade 12 in Hochschule. You know, that's it. That's the end of the road. That's the end of the map. And so it's a way of saying, and Gog is known as Gyges in Herodotus. Togarmah is identified with Lygdamus among the Greeks. So Gog and Magog represent the nations of the world. Ezekiel lists those on the edge of his geographical map to show that all the nations of the world will rise up and attack the people of God. We're getting there. We're not there. I don't know if we're there yet, but we're getting there. Some policemen and some pastors in Chicago were put in prison. Yeah, so it's coming. So we have these allusions to Ezekiel in Revelation 19. We have these allusions in Revelation 20. So this suggests that they are the same battle, and he's going around the topic. Now, Tom Schreiner says no, because you can't have repetition in the same section, but he doesn't have the best view of the literary structure. So see Stephen Schooling, and you'll see that chapter 20 begins a new section. I'll say one thing about Armageddon, just to make sure. So this is a symbolic name. It's not a real place. There is no place called Armageddon, okay? Notice it's made up of two words. It's made up of two words, Har and Mageddon. Does everyone see that? Well, Mageddon is the only place where Mageddon is spelled with an N is Zechariah 12:10. So it's not really a reference to Megiddo, it's a reference to Zechariah 12:10. And Har means mountain, but if you know anything about geography, Megiddo is not a mountain. It's called a plain in the Old Testament. We read about the waters of Megiddo, but there's no mountain. But the mountain comes from Ezekiel because the final battle is on the mountains of Israel. So it's a symbolic place. All right, we're 2:20. I've got a few more minutes and then we can conclude. All right. I want you to notice the literary arrangement of topics. Okay? There's a new narrative that begins in chapter 12. We see Satan cast down from heaven to earth in chapter 12. This is matched by Satan cast down from the earth to the abyss in chapter 20. Then we see the beast and the false prophet conquer in chapter 13. When we see the beast and the false prophet conquered in chapter 19. Then we see the whore riding the beast, and then we see the whore destroyed by the beast. So this is a chiastic structure. Do you all know what a chiastic structure is? A, B, C, C, B, A. Does everyone see that? Do you know what that means? This is not a chronological arrangement. It's a literary arrangement. He's not telling you how to get your calendar out and figure out how this is going to work out. It's a literary arrangement. Look at chapter 20. In chapter 20, which everyone argues about and wants to know about the millennium, it has 4 paragraphs, and they're in an A-B pattern. Satan imprisoned, justice for believers, Satan defeated, justice for unbelievers. So it's a literary arrangement. It's not a chronological arrangement. I think that my position, and I respect other people's positions, I think the attempt to find a location in space and time for the millennium is a misguided attempt. John has no intentions of doing that. He's talking about how God is going to destroy it. You know, does Satan put people in prison? Well, we're going to put him in prison too. God is going to be just. He's going to have retributive justice. But he's not telling you how that's going to work out in space and time. Very quickly, the 7th cycle. Now let's look at this. We're about at an hour. Are we about at an hour? 5 minutes. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this and quit. When you see this, it will lift you right off your chair. Are you ready? The Alpha and the Omega. This occurs only 3 times in the book of Revelation. Did you know that God the Father speaks only twice in the book? So in 1:8 he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And in 21:6 he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In 1:17, Christ says, I am the first and the last. And then in 22:13, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. So this is Jesus speaking. And he's saying the same thing that God the Father says. Not only that, to say I am the first and the last is only said by Yahweh in the Old Testament. So if you know your Old Testament, this is what Yahweh says. Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, his Redeemer, the Yahweh of armies, I am the first and the last. Besides me, there is no God. So when Jesus says, I am the first and the last, that's Yahweh speaking. And it's incredibly, it's incredible. So at the end of the prologue, we have God saying, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, and it's connected with the parousia, the second coming of Christ. Then Jesus, at the beginning of the vision, says, I am the first of the last, and this is connected with new life, the resurrected Christ. Then, at the end of the vision, Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, so he says what God says. He says, I'm the beginning of the end, and it's connected with new life. And then, at the beginning of the epilogue, God says, I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end, and it's connected with the second coming. So this is an A, B, B, A pattern. Do you see how incredible the literary structure of this book is? Every statement is there for a reason. In the parousia, God, who is the beginning of all things, will become the end of all things. Christ entered new creation life at resurrection, which all the redeemed share at the new creation. That's a good place to end.